All right, welcome back. Let's start today with an easy lesson that you'll learn in this class that gets into contemporary political discussions. History is often inconvenient for politicians and pundits. They often invoke history to support their political agenda without any knowledge of history at all. When historians call them on their BS, they often respond that historians are biased and not interested in the facts. And they say that historians spend too much time on interpretation, and historians should simply give the public the facts, which they mean just tell the public stuff that happened and when it happened. And so in this unit where we look at Reconstruction and race in the late 19th century, you're going to learn that it's impossible to avoid interpretation and simply give the facts. Even if our job was simply to give you the dates of legislation, court cases, and wars, we would still have to make difficult choices in what to include and what to exclude. There isn't enough room in a history book to include even a tiny fraction of all the important things that unfolded in U.S. history. So in choosing what to include, anyone offering historical facts offers their interpretation of what's important. So let's make one thing clear from the start. The just give me the facts version of history is a myth. It doesn't exist unless you could document and tell the experience minute by minute of every person who ever lived within the United States. Another lesson we'll learn in this unit is that facts are only one part of truth. In other words, you can bring together a bunch of facts and still distort the truth. This might be harder to understand, so stay with me. Imagine that we wanted to write a high school history textbook chapter on Reconstruction. And if you remember from high school, this is traditionally seen as the period after the Civil War, between 1865 and 1877, where the federal government worked out the political status of African Americans. Now imagine that we only chose to include all of the legislation and constitutional amendments that gave African Americans new rights, and we chose to exclude all the efforts of Southerners to resist the implementation of these things. Or let's say we chose to ignore the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and all of the African Americans elected to political office and simply focus on the rise of the KKK and other organizations that sought to oppress African Americans after the Civil War. Both stories would only include facts, but by ignoring essential components of the overall story, both would distort the truth, right? So even choosing when to start and end a history impacts the conclusions that readers make. Later in this unit, for example, we're going to read an article that offers a different way to understand Reconstruction simply by expanding the time period beyond the traditional 1865 to 1877 period. And when you do that, you have to include new facts, right, that can possibly change the way that you see Reconstruction. So in this unit, we're going to experiment with this a bit by questioning what we should include in a high school history textbook chapter that tries to teach students about the history of race and ethnicity in the mid to late 19th century. We're going to start today by examining how one of the popular high school history textbooks approved in Texas covers this period. And so I've scanned every page in this textbook that looks at race and ethnicity during this time period. And there are a couple of things I want you to recognize. First, the traditional story of Reconstruction as it pertains to African Americans is in a single chapter that you're going to read. Right? And so scan through here. And the second thing I want you to recognize is right after that chapter, I've scanned everything from any other really minority group. And it's all buried in other chapters throughout the textbook. You know, in the scanned PDF here, you'll see big jumps between pages after the Reconstruction chapter. So as you read this, I want you to start thinking about what impact this decision to separate all of these groups have on your understanding of race and ethnicity during this time period. And start asking yourself, what would a chapter that included all of these groups together actually look like? Would it force readers to think about race and ethnicity in new ways? If you haven't figured it out by now, the paper assignment for this week is going to focus on writing a new chapter. Really giving advice on how to write a new chapter of race and ethnicity for a high school history textbook. Right? You're not going to write the entire thing. Instead, you're going to offer advice on what to include and how to organize such a chapter. So start thinking about that as you read. And the next set of readings are going to help you further. And so the quiz for today is to make sure you do the reading. The quizzes might seem burdensome, but if I don't do quizzes, I find most students don't complete the reading, and then they're really scrambling to complete the unit assignment. Especially in a summer term, you have to keep up with the reading because you won't have time to scramble and catch up when you're writing the paper. So believe it or not, the quizzes are there to improve the quality of your assignments and consequently your final grade. There's no time limit on the quizzes as long as you turn in the quiz by the deadline. You can also have the reading open when you complete the quiz. Don't hesitate to email me with any questions as we move along. If you think that a phone call or Skype session will be more helpful than an email exchange, I'm always happy to do that. So good luck and contact me if you need help.